You guys probably remember me as being Mr. Parsons in the elementary school. Mrs. Parsons has asked me to explain a little bit about elk ranching and what I do with raising elk. It started out as kind of a hobby, just something that I wanted to get into, and it's kind of turned into a couple of different things as far as a way to maybe earn a little bit of money. There's not a lot of money in raising elk. It's more still just for fun. About 13, 14 years ago, I just wanted to have some elk, and so I started out with one bull and I think 4 cows, and started raising elk. And ironically enough, the very first bull I bought was this bull right here, and I'll explain this bull right here. This is all the same bull, just sheds from the same bull every year, and I'll explain that in a minute. But elk ranching, like I said, it's pretty tough to make any money at it. You could not make a living at this. It's just more of a hobby. It's something fun to do. It's really fun to watch the babies be born in the spring, and it's fun to watch the antlers grow in the summer. So I'm just going to take you through a rundown of how this works. Typically, the main goal is to raise big bulls. Hunters want to shoot the biggest bulls that they can find, and of course they get what they pay for. If they don't have a lot of money and they still want to hunt, they can shoot a smaller bull, but the goal is to raise big bulls. So typically, if you get a good bull, it takes about 5 or 6 years to get a bull big enough to where you really can take advantage and make a little bit of money on a bull. As far as hunting him, we cannot hunt them here. This is just a elk ranch. It's not a hunting park. They call places where they kill them hunting parks. This is just an elk ranch. This is where we feed and raise and grow the antlers on the bulls that we need and try to grow. So I guess the easiest thing to do is just tell you something kind of interesting right off the bat. Is this one thing that interests me is a bull. This bull has a spike. I don't have his spike horns, but this is his 2-year-old horn right here. And I'd like you to just pay attention to, even though they shed their antlers, I called it a horn, it's really an antler. Even though they shed their antlers in the fall, this would be his 2-year-old antler, this would be his 3-year-old antler. Even though they shed them, they come back with much the same horn pattern. If you look at the angle of these brow tines and his third and his sword, this is his 4th. He's rubbed this one off when he was young, and he starts to show similar characteristics. Like if I turn him just right, you can see this little hook right here. Even though he's dropped them, see that little hook right there on both of those antlers, even though he's 2. And here's 3, here's 4. You can look and see the same pattern to him. He started to grow some extra tines, but you can see the same. If I laid that on there, it's almost the exact same horn pattern, even though he's a year older. This is his 5-year-old horn. And you can see each year he gets just a little bit bigger and a little bit heavier. See, this extra didn't grow as long this year. See that extra right there? This is the same extra. They call it an extra because it's not the normal spot for a point. This is his 6-year-old. This is the last set that I got from him, because when he was 7, I sold him. So this is the last set before he was actually shot. And I kept both sides of this one. So you can kind of see he didn't even grow that extra much that time. He's got this one right here that he started. This little tine in here was longer and then shorter. But again, you can see each year he's overall length. If I stand him up, look how much longer he grew this next year. You see the difference in the tine length right here on how long this one is. How long his brow tines even are on that one, and his sword. So every year he grows the same pattern, just gets a little bit heavier and a little bit longer each year. The year that we sold this bull, he scored 438. It's one of the bigger bulls that they killed on the ranch. That's the biggest bull that I've ever raised here. And that was, ironically, it was the first one that I ever had. So that's kind of an interesting thing about genetics, and how even though they drop their antlers in the fall, the next spring they grow back to almost the exact same horn pattern, only a little bit bigger and a little bit heavier. This is an example. Sometimes you'll see a bull that'll have a freak horn. That's because they've been injured. This bull, when he was a spike, was fighting and broke his skull plate, which means he actually broke his skull, and the one horn, this horn right here, dangled off his left ear. It just fell down across his eye. And I tried to patch it. This was actually his other spike horn. And I tried to patch it back and pull it up. I actually knocked him out with a tranquilizer. And this was his right side as a spike. And I took his broken antler and propped it back up and tried to like glue PVC and put it back together. And it mended that way, but he never grew a proper antler on that side. This is the last shed I got of him before we shot him. And it just turned into a freak because he had been damaged. So when you see a bull in the wild that's got a freaky antler, it's because he's been damaged. When sometime he's had broken pedicle. The pedicle is a little part right above their head. If you notice on these bulls, I don't know if you can see this one, but before he starts onto his antler, you can see about an inch of bone. That's called the pedicle. And they usually, when they're damaged, they damage that pedicle, and that's what causes the antler growth to be funny. This bull right here, this is a spike bull. This is probably the biggest spike I've ever raised here. This is what he looked at as a spike. And you notice these antlers have been cut. I've cut them off. That's so that when they're in the fall, when they rut, they don't kill each other. But this was kind of a unique bull, and he's still here. It might be this bull right here behind me. It's either this one or 1703. But these bulls are still here. This is the velvet. You can see the velvet on the antlers when we cut them, and they do bleed when we cut them in the velvet. This one you can start to see, that's the velvet when they start to strip. It comes off. So you can see what a velvet antler looks like. Right now these bulls are growing a lot every day. You can almost watch them grow daily. And if you touch their antlers right now, it's almost like they're on fire. You can actually feel the heat in their antlers, and it's because there's so much blood and nutrients being pushed up into their antlers to get the growth, that the blood's circulating so fast it's just really, really warm to the touch. Like if you felt the antler, you'd think the elk had a fever. But that's just the blood pumping through their antlers. In the fall, going back to the fall, we have to, in the wild, bulls create a dominance. The biggest bulls run the smaller bulls off, and you'll hear them talk about a herd bull. Well, here in these pastures, there's not enough places for them to get away. So in order to save them and protect them so they don't kill each other, we cut their antlers off about the first or second week in August. And then they become what we call slicks. And that just means we cut their antlers off about an inch or two above their pedicle. We got to be careful not to get into their pedicle to damage it. But just cut their antlers off an inch or two above their pedicle, and that way they can't gore each other. So these are called buttons. In the spring, they shed them just like normal. They would shed these buttons in the spring, and I gather them up. I've got a whole bunch of them. But that's kind of what they shed, and we keep and sell the antlers after we cut them off. So this would be what the spike looked like after he had been cut off. You can see those cut edges. And then we just gather up his buttons in the spring. As far as scoring a bull, you get several measurements, but the biggest measurements are overall length, which means from the base of the antler all the way up to the tip. And then you measure each antler individually. And an inch is a point. So Boone and Crockett, they just measure each antler as a point. So I'm just guessing, but that brow tine right there is probably, I would say 16, 17, maybe even 18 inches. So he would get 17 or 18 points for that tine. This in here is probably a little longer. He might get 20 points for that tine. So the way they score a bull is they add up all their points for their tine length and their overall horn length, antler length, plus they get mass measurements, which means how big around the antler is. They get mass measurements up the antler that gives them points for that. Then they also get an overall width score. So a bull that's narrow, I'll just use this for an example. You know, a narrow bull would look more like this, and a wide bull would lay out more like that, so he'd get more points for his width. So that kind of gives you an idea how, when you hear somebody talk about how much did he score, that's what they're doing. They're talking about how many points or how many inches of antler he has. Okay, as far as nutrition goes, these elk get fed far better than any elk in the wild, and these elk are checked every year and vaccinated with what we call 8-way. They're probably far healthier than most of the elk on the mountain, just because of their diet and the way they're cared for. Rarely, elk are pretty hardy. Rarely do they get sick and die. In the 13 years, I've probably only lost maybe 2 elk because of illness. I've lost a couple because they get their antlers caught in the fence and break their necks, but not very many. That doesn't happen very often. It's kind of a freak thing. But once they're here and born, they're pretty hardy. They do pretty well. I'll feed these elk here in just a minute, and maybe you can get a close-up look at them. Jackson can maybe get the camera up close. So their diet, they do better on grass. So this is mainly a grass bale of hay, mostly grass. Alfalfa is good, but it's rich in protein. And we've got to be careful because of the pellet we feed them. This is a pellet. It's called record rack, and it looks much like a rabbit feed, but it's just high in protein. It makes their antlers grow, and it makes their toenails grow. So if you ever come around the elk ranch, you see bulls with big long toenails, it's because of all the protein they're eating. So they get grass hay, they get a pellet, and they also get all the free-range grass pasture that they want to eat. So they obviously are fed really well and taken well care of. If they ever get sick, we doctor them, take care of them that way. One important thing I probably need to tell you is that when you go to visit an elk ranch, most of the year, it's just really fun and enjoyable. Right now, they're pretty docile. Their hormones aren't going, and they're actually kind of scared of you. They're pretty accustomed to me, so they'll let me get in and they'll stay kind of close to me. But if too many people come around, they'll run and try to get away from you. The point I'm getting to, in the fall, when they start to rut, they look at humans, particularly in this pasture, because they can't get away. In the mountains, when they see you, they'll just round up their cows and move off. But here, they can't get away from you. So the herd bull will typically, and even the other bulls will typically see you as a threat. And it's it's really important that you don't, in the fall of the year, get into an elk fence with bulls. They will kill you. They will run a horn clean through you. So I just say that as a word of caution. If you ever come to visit the elk ranch, and you're welcome to come and visit this one anytime you want, but in the fall it's particularly nervy to me to have people around when these bulls are not afraid of you. They would rather get you than run from you. Right now I don't worry at all, because when their antlers are soft like this, they protect them. They don't want to break them. They're very tender, they're very cautious with their antlers. You'll watch them here when they eat. They'll be very careful not to bump each other. They don't want to cause problems for each other, and they're always looking out for their antlers in the summer when they're growing. When they get hard-horned, it's just a war. That's why we have to trim them off, because it's just a fight to see who's the toughest. So that's why they all get their antlers cut off in the fall. Of course, the ones we keep, the ones that go to the ranch, we haul them to the ranch in big horse trailers. That's the kill ranch, and they go up there while they're still in the velvet. Their velvet's just starting to harden. We take them up there before their hormones get goofy and they start to fight, just so that we stay safe and the bulls stay safe. And when they get on the ranch, they have enough room. There's thousands of acres up there that they can just free roam like a wild bull. And when we take them up there, even though they look domesticated here, if I was to open a gate and let them out, they would be gone. They would no longer respect. They would just become wild. And when we take them to the ranch, they pretty much just go back to being a wild elk again. There are occasions when you raise one on a bottle that you can. We had a cow here that I kept for a lot of years that we had bottle raised, and she was friendly all year round, and you can get in and pet her. But typically, they don't let you do that. They pretty much revert back to being pretty wild. Yeah, in the spring, once they've had their young, the cows. I don't like to get in when the mothers have babies, because they will run you down and stomp you. It's a little scary. So I've scaled a few fences. Yeah, it's not fun. One other thing that I probably ought to mention is my operation is, I've got about 10 cows that we try to raise babies on every year. It takes a long time for a bull to get big enough to be worth a lot of money. As a spike, a really good spike like that might be worth $1,500 on his spike year. Every year they grow, they get to be worth more and more money. But in order to get a lot of money for a bull, I think this bull, when I sold him, it runs in my mind that he scored, remember, he scored 438, which is pretty big. And I think I got $8,500 out of him, $8,500 for him. But you can see I kept him for 7 years. So I had a lot of time and a lot of feed in him to get him that big. But once they get to about that age, they either need to go to the ranch, or that's their prime. They call it their prime when they're about 5, 6, 7 years old. That's when they're about as big as they're going to get. Behind me, this is the handling facility. Everything's designed to where you don't have to get in with the elk. There's gates that you swing behind them on little compartments. So when the elk move into one compartment, you'll open a gate, and there'll be a gate that'll swing behind him so you stay away from him and push him into the next compartment. So the elk are moved with gates, a series of gates and sliding gates that push them forward and hold them. And when we haul them, the very last gate, you can actually see behind me, right behind this bull right here, it swings open, and we back the horse trailers right there, and the very last gate we swing on them is the trailer gate. So we just keep pushing them with gates until the last gate that they go through is the trailer gate, and they get pushed right up into the trailer. When we vaccinate them, there's a place in there where they have to make a turn, and we push them with gates into a squeeze. The squeeze actually comes up their sides and just pinches them and rolls up higher on their neck and actually pulls their head up tight. And that's the way we get them to where we can cut their antlers off in the fall. It's kind of nervy and scary. It usually takes 3 or 4 guys to to do it if you're doing it right and being safe. Some guys will dart them and knock them out. And we've done that with bulls before, shot them with tranquilizers. The scary part about that is sometimes, I've never had one not wake up, but they say it's a possibility if you give them too much drug that you can put them to sleep and they won't wake up. So I don't like to do that very often. Typically if they're hurt, we'll do that, or if we need to do something to take care of them. One bull, actually this first bull had I don't know how he did it, but he found an old tire and he got a tire wrapped up in his horns, and things like that you have to kind of knock them down and take care of them that way. But the squeeze, it would be almost impossible to handle these elk without a squeeze chute, some way to contain them and squeeze them tight to where they can't kick and try to get you. Every year, I'm mandated by the Department of Agriculture, the Utah State Department of Agriculture, and there's a lady in charge of elk, the elk on all the state. This little operation of mine is minuscule. There's ranchers that have hundreds of elk in one place. Every year, the Department of Agriculture comes to my ranch, walk my fence lines to make sure I've got signs telling people that it's a private elk ranch. They look at the overall health of the herd to make sure they're not being starved or they're not sick. I have to pay an annual fee to keep these elk here. That's all part of the regulation. That goes along with that, you'll notice these bulls have two tags. They'll have a tag that's called a dangle tag that has a number. That's just the way I identify them. And if you look real close, they'll also have a little round button, microchip they call it, in their other ear. These elk are closely monitored on computers and records year to year. Every year I have to turn in my head count, and it has to be accurate. So people that say, well, that bull was an elk raised on a ranch and turned out into the wild, if that's really not very possible. I could turn these elk out. If somebody found out I would be out of business, they'd come and shut me down, take my elk, and I'd be done. The dangle tags and the microchips are a way of keeping track. Like I said, she comes down and I have to have written records to show her. She logs them into the computer. They've got to match up from the year before so that there's no discrepancy in, well, you had this bull last year, where is he now? If I do move the bull to the ranch or I sell a bull, I have to have the Department of Agriculture come, do paperwork on that bull. That paperwork has to travel with the bull to wherever he goes. Then he's recorded into that elk rancher's herd. There are a lot of people that think the Spider Bull was raised on a ranch. I personally don't know that he wasn't, but there are things that have to happen when a bull is born and raised on a ranch. They have to have these tags and they have to be identified. That Spider Bull had to have been 5, 6, 7 years old, and it would have been hard for somebody to hide that bull, especially with the size that he is on a ranch. People can come up in here and look at this ranch whenever they want. Typically any ranch in the state, people can drive right up to and look and see the bulls that are in there. If a bull was not tagged, it would be the Department of Agriculture would find that. Another reason I don't think the Spider Bull was a ranch-raised bull, he didn't have tattoos in his lip, he didn't have holes in his ears. If you look at these bulls, when they shoot these bulls, one of the first things they do is cut the tags out of the ears. That bull had no holes in his ears, he had no tattoo in his lip, no microchip. So the bull, in my opinion, was not a ranch-raised bull. That's just my opinion. It would have been hard for somebody to do that. But they are very strictly regulated by the Department of Agriculture. You can see that they're still showing dominance right now, but you've noticed they won't ever hit each other with those antlers. They're too tender. But as far as feeding them, right now these bulls eat about 2 bales of hay a day, and they eat about probably 30 pounds of pellets a day. Not each, 30 pounds together. So that'd be about 3 pounds in each pellet, that each get a day, plus all the grass that they can eat. So that's basically the feeding of them. So I know Mrs. Parsons has lined up an opportunity for you to bring your families and come and look at the elk up close, and I'm great with that. I know Mrs. Parsons wants you to schedule that so she knows that she's here, or I'm here, or something. The one thing that I would caution is you don't bring a whole lot of people, and you don't run and be wild and loud. Like I said, right now they're used to me. If there was 30 kids right here, these elk would be in the bottom corner of this pasture right now. They're used to me and Jackson and my wife, just a few people being quiet and kind of being slow around them. But if there was a big crowd right here, they would just revert back into being wild elk, and it's probably good that we're doing it this way because you get to see them better. If there was a lot of people, they'll just run to the other end of the pasture. So if you want to see them up close, you're actually better off to come in the morning sometime if possible. And they typically lay in the shade in front of my house. And if you just almost stay in the car, or if you do get out of the car, just be quiet and walk slow and don't get too many people out at once. And then they'll typically just let you look at them. If you're loud and running and crazy, they'll just walk away and you won't get to see them up close. So that's probably the best I can tell you about looking at them. Anyway, thanks. If you have questions, ask Mrs. Parsons.